Hello everyone, welcome. If you are here in episode 5, surely you must already be subscribed to be sticking with it this far. If not, please do, it's incredibly helpful to me. If they're useful, please hit like. Please comment down below if you've any questions or any other remarks that you want to make, and I'll do my best to get back to you as fast as I can. Equally, if you hit the notifications bell, you will get alerted to forthcoming episodes and things as they arise. Today's session is on part 4. It shouldn't be terribly long. I want to zoom in some detail on chapter 8, but then the remainder of this section is likely to be more of a summary. In chapter 8, Offred and Offglen pass the wall and see 3 new bodies hanging there. One is a priest, the other 2 are homosexuals, as what Gilead terms gender treachery is forbidden. Offglen comments on the beautiful May day, and Offred thinks about Luke in the time before, discussing the meaning of May Day as a distress signal. As Offred returns to the commander's house, Nick speaks to her. She doesn't reply because such communication is forbidden. She sees Serena Joy and remembers Aunt Lydia warning them about the resentment of the wives. Rita and Cora go on to discuss who's going to supervise Offred's bath to guard against self-harm. And Offred goes upstairs to her room and has something of a shock in passing the commander, who, to her surprise, is on the landing outside where he's not supposed to be. Chapter 8. The good weather holds. It's almost like June, when we get out our sundresses and our sandals and go for an ice cream cone. There are 3 new bodies hanging on the wall. One is a priest, still wearing the black cassock. That's been put on him for the trial, even though they gave up wearing those years ago, when the sect wars first began. Cassocks made them too conspicuous. The other 2 have purple placards hung around their necks. Gender treachery. Their bodies still wear the Guardian uniforms. Caught together, they must have been. But where? A barracks? A shower? It's hard to say. The snowman with the red smile is gone. We should go back, I say to Offglen. I'm always the one to say this. Sometimes I feel if I didn't say it, she would stay here forever. But is she mourning or gloating? I still can't tell. Without a word, she swivels, as if she's voice activated, as if she's on little oiled wheels, as if she's on top of a music box. I resent this grace of hers. I resent her meek head, bowed as if into a heavy wind. But there is no wind. We leave the wall, walk back the way we came in the warm sun. It's a beautiful May day, Offglen says. I feel, rather than see, her head turn toward me, waiting for a reply. Yes, I say. Praise be, I add as an afterthought. May Day used to be a distress signal a long time ago, in one of those wars we studied in high school. I kept getting them mixed up, but you could tell them apart by the airplanes if you paid attention. It was Luke who told me about May Day, though. May Day, May Day, for pilots whose planes had been hit. And ships, Was it ships too? At sea? Maybe it was SOS for ships. I wish I could look it up. And it was something from Beethoven. For the beginning of the victory in one of those wars. Do you know where it came from? Said Luke. Mayday. No, I said. It's a strange word to use for that, isn't it? Newspapers and coffee on Sunday mornings before she was born. There were still newspapers then. We used to read them in bed. It's French, he said. From Mayday? Help me. So I want to explore this on the next slide in a little more detail, some of the details from that extract. A little later in the next couple of pages, Ofglen and Offred part. They both use the right prescribed farewell of under his eye, the his with a capital being God, but again this ruling by fear of panoptic surveillance. And she goes on to pass the tulips and again remark on them, but this time they're no longer wine cups, but chalices. A tulip, when it's in full bloom, has the shape of a wine glass. And that for her is connoting the idea of a chalice, something like the Holy Grail. If you've seen Indiana Jones, the Holy Grail, the idea that this one artifact from the times of Jesus could be filled with water that becomes holy water and becomes the elixir of life, something for eternal life. Here, the idea of a chalice being empty, a womb that is not fertile and carrying a baby. Once that wine cup wilts, it inverts so that the stamen are protruding, but the rest of the petals have wilted away. And we'll go on to look at a little bit of the close language analysis symbolism that you might use there too. So there are a lot of layers of sophisticated things going on in this page and a bit. We've got to be savvy about playing the exam game. I've spoken quite a lot about the need to engage with assessment objective 3, the social and historical context. It doesn't have to just be social and historical. It's not necessarily just context of production, i.e. the author writing the novel. It can be of reception too, but we'll come to that later in the course. Here, I want to look at really closely engaging with context so that you are doing something that links very closely to your AO2 analysis of how language shapes meaning. You're killing 2 or 3 birds with one stone, and you're showing your examiner that you can do close analysis and meaningfully link to context and how it adds to that thematic meaning about oppressive regimes in this case. That being the case, you need to think about how you're going to do that quickly and efficiently, because you've only got an hour and a quarter. And I like this particular example because it's terribly subtle and there won't be a huge number of candidates that pick up on it. The chapter starts out with this small talk, if you will, about the weather. And then in a short clause, after some talk of good weather, it could be the following month, ice cream, very brutally in a short clause, 3 new bodies on the wall. One's a priest. They no longer wear the uniform, the cassock that they once did, because it has to be clandestine. We get this idea of a civil war, sect wars. And then we find that there are 2 guardians who have been executed who are wearing purple placards as a result of gender treachery. This alludes to the idea of some people within the Christian faith considering homosexuality, being gay, to be sinful. I want to be very careful about how we talk about that. I don't want to automatically assume that such a view in contemporary society is necessarily homophobic. Somebody has a democratic freedom to a religious faith whereby they may think that to be something that's working on a spiritual level. Here, though, it's been taken to the appalling extreme of execution. So it's important that your use of socio-historic context is closely engaging with the analysis. AO3 context, AO2 analysis. And it might be quite sophisticated and impressive for an examiner, and something that you can do in a quick, efficient, short and sharp way to tie in the purple colour of the placards here that Atwood describes the victims having round their necks, hung for the crime of being gay. We can make here an allusion to the Holocaust. Many people hear the term Holocaust and immediately think of the Jewish victims, quite understandably. It was a genocide of 6 million people and is hateful, abhorrent. But there were also many other groups within the concentration camps as part of the horrid euphemism of Nazism's final solution. Later in this section, in chapter 12, whilst Offred's having a bath, she remarks on the 4 digits and an I that have been tattooed on her, a passport in reverse. Her use of metaphor here is that a passport normally gets you through a border, but this tattoo is designed to keep you trapped within Gilead's borders. Another thing that's reminiscent of the Holocaust. Here we are having an allusion that's very subtle, that would impress an examiner if they recognise it within their own general knowledge, admittedly. The Jews within the concentration camps, as you will know, were identified by the Star of David on their arms or on the chest of their clothing. Here, other categories are shown to be existed. Blue triangle designated you as a Jehovah's Witness. A red triangle was a more generic other political prisoners. And still others were incarcerated within the camps as a result of physical or special needs, perhaps mental disabilities. The thing that's being alluded to more precisely here is that homosexuals, people who were gay, would also have been incarcerated within the camps, and they would have been designated by a pink triangle. And I think here, this is my speculation, but I think here Atwood is subtly alluding to that through this detail of the purple colour of the placards designating homosexuality, which the regime of Gilead considers gender treachery. Within this chapter, Offglen goes on to use an awkward term that seems strange. Offred is still very much thinking that she may or may not be somebody she's got to be wary of if she's a devout believer. And she resentfully talks about her being too polished, being on little oiled wheels, being voice activated. Actually, she's doing the same thing Offred is, of making sure that she doesn't seem to be anything other than a compliant, non-dissenting, loyal member of the regime. She goes on to say that it's a beautiful May day, which seems awkward. We'd either say that it's a beautiful day, or, oh, I love the month of May, it's great weather. But here, May Day is her attempt to see if Offred is a compatriot, it later emerges that it's the name of the underground resistance movement that's attempting to get people out of Gilead, or at least help them while they're suffering under it. And this leads us to Offred considering the origins of the term. So, if you want to briefly pause here, on what levels is this working? Why is the term Mayday significant? And then, on a deeper level, why is its origin useful to apply to the story itself? That's what I mean by engaging. If you simply tell me the answer, you are showing some bolt-on awareness. You've shoehorned in your knowledge for AO3. It's only by applying it to the text that you are helping along your AO2 close analysis and AO1 argument. So pause for me, please, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So a number of layers here. Firstly, Mayday, 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 Mayday is a common international distress signal at both seafaring and for pilots of planes. The idea being that it's something that would be internationally recognised despite any kind of language barrier. It does originate from the term m'aider, help me, in French. So layer 1, it's a distress signal. Layer 2, Offred recognises its origins. Layer 3, she goes on to isolate it, help me, because she herself is screaming for help in this regime. Layer 4, Offglen has used the term to say that she is a source of help in the form of the resistance. Notice that Offglen, when she says it's a beautiful May day, Offred says, I feel rather than see her turn her head toward me. She has to turn her head because of the blinkered uniform, but she is looking for a reaction. Does Offred recognise that Offred is the signal for being part of this resistance? Mayday, help me. Atwood gives meaning to help me by placing it on a separate line, where it becomes more than a mere translation from the French. It's a cry from Offred, seeking escape from the regime. Offred remembers that it used to be a distress signal like SOS, Save Our Souls. This is a signal from Offglen that she's part of a resistance movement. Offred also remembers that it was something from Beethoven. The opening bars of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony became a kind of code for victories among the anti-Nazi allies in the Second World War. The fact that Offred, who is intelligent and well educated, is lacking confidence in her memory of this and unable to Google or read anymore, also serves to highlight again the need to know one's history to guard against allowing oppression to creep up on a society, even under the guise of a greater good for safety. She talks about being a little bit muddled on which war it was. I think Atwood there is trying to show that history can quickly be erased unless we keep an eye on it. I don't think that Offred is actually a character that would be muddled given the detail that she is remembering. but she feels less confident. She's almost been a bit gaslighted or indoctrinated by this regime. And that's one of the core messages, as you know, that I feel Atwood really has here. Offred remembers Luke telling her that it came from French. We learned that Offred and Luke liked to talk about communication and the meanings of words. Be aware that the border with Canada, north of New England, is often French speaking. So they enjoy communicating about the meanings of words. These are important concepts in the novel because Gilead restricts language. This awareness of etymology, if etymology is a piece of new terminology to you, etymology means the history of origins of words within a language, also conveys the need not to forget our history or let it become a palimpsest, in order to guard against not seeing oppression coming again in the future. When Ofglen and Offred part in this chapter, Offred says, "She is like my own reflection in a mirror from which I am moving away." This is her talking about how identical Ofglen is to her, but it could easily refer to Serena Joy just as easily. It's at this point as well that they have departed from one another with the prescribed saying goodbye under his eye. Again, this capitalised his, evoking the idea of God, but conveying this paranoid fear of constant surveillance. Is this somebody that she can trust or not? So this novel is full of the motif, the recurring concept of duality, of doubles or doppelgängers. You may have come across the term doppelganger before. You will likely have done so if you have studied Frankenstein, but if you haven't, that's fine. There's one key definition of doppelganger that in contemporary society you're very likely to be aware of, but there are a couple of other more sophisticated, detailed ones within literary analysis. So, take pause for me at this point. Can you define the term doppelganger? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The most contemporary and likely definition that you might know is the idea of somebody else on the planet having such a similar appearance to somebody else as to be like an identical twin. They could have committed a murder and it ended up pinned on you, for example. That could apply to Offred and Ofglen in terms of appearance, or any pairing of handmaids. Doubled, I walk the street, a shape like mine. She is like my reflection from which I am moving away. Following the image of the reflection suggests that Offred is still well aware of her own individuality despite Gilead wanting to suppress it. That being said, there are a couple of more unusual, less straightforward forms and definitions and categories or concepts of doppelganger. They don't just necessarily have to centre on physical appearance. So if you dismiss that idea of looking similar from your head, another type of doppelganger or double can be a character who represents everything that our core character, our hero, abhors or hates. By this definition, Serena Joy might fit such a category of doppelganger for Offred. the creature for Victor Frankenstein and vice versa. A third category of doppelganger is almost the opposite of the last one. Instead of possessing characteristics that the hero hates, this third category possesses personality traits that our core character lacks, and thus that doppelganger becomes a helper, a support. They're able to complete the hero's personality and help them in some way, shape or form in their cause or quest. You might say by that definition that Nick is that to Offred, or that Clerval is that to Victor Frankenstein, or Walton to Victor Frankenstein, up to a point, through being an assistant and helper in both cases. Equally, other types of doppelgangers that come up, we might say that there are parallels between Nick and Luke in being Offred's lover. So you can take that a really long way in terms of thematic analysis. With everything to choose from in the way of names, why did she pick that one? Serena Joy was never her real name, not even then. Her real name was Pam. Offred recalls that Serena used to appear on a TV evangelical Christian show in the time before, advocating the woman's return to the home, and that her stage name was Serena Joy. What's the significance of Serena Joy's chosen name? And how does Offred feel towards Serena in this chapter? How can you tell? The chapter talks about tulips no longer being wine cups but chalices. They are, after all, empty. We've got this Holy Grail symbolism here, which I will go on to in greater detail in a couple of slides' time. The woman being the empty vessel, if not with child. Serena Joy stays in her home, but it doesn't seem to agree with her. Perhaps this is about her resenting Offred. I'm being deliberately vague there by just saying resentful. Take pause at this point and have a think about the layers on which that might work. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Anger, respect, empathy, sympathy, tolerance, frustration, resentment. Even though she dislikes Serena, Offred is sensitive enough to see that in some ways they are in similar situations. Both are victims of the Gileadian regime. Both desperately need Offred to have a child. Although Offred is appalled at the heartlessness of Serena's failure to realise what it means to Offred to have her daughter taken away, Offred recognises some parallels, and indeed a growing collusion when it comes to the arrangement with Nick, between them, but we'll come to that a little later. Later, when Offred contemplates committing suicide, she also briefly thinks about killing Serena, as it would put her out of her misery. There is a character here to Offred's personality that allows for layers of awareness and sensitivity. The tulips along the border are redder than ever, opening. No longer wine cups, but chalices, thrusting themselves up. To what end? They are, after all, empty. When they turn themselves inside out, then explode slowly, the petals are thrown out like shards. So the image on the top left here is of a tulip in the prime of its bloom. It's the shape of a wine glass. But as it wilts, it ends up looking like this on the bottom image. So the wine cup image conveys this idea of being a vessel. She's already referred to the idea of the handmaids being two-legged wombs, being ambulatory chalices. And she goes on to refer to the wilting tulips as a broken chalice. A chalice, if you're unfamiliar, is a goblet, a bit like a wine glass, often made of precious metal, the sort of thing that would be used for communion in church, the drinking of the wine to represent Christ's blood, or Jesus' blood to be more precise, within the Holy Trinity. So here, the chalice, the vessel that holds something, like a womb, they are looking for fertility, they're looking for produce, they are looking for a baby. But here, it is thrusting itself up to no end, because they are, after all, empty. This desire for a chalice, a womb to contain a baby, is being foiled. It's empty. Thrusting there has a sexual connotation. We've got this idea of the chalice as a womb, a vessel of life. We've got the red colour connoting menstrual blood. We've got the thrusting here connoting sex, phallic symbolism, the penis, fertilisation, in much the same way as the stamen, which you see in that second picture that's lower than the first, is the male part of the flower. And you've got the pollen on the other parts of the stamen there as well, that bees, etc., insects will come to collect. Nevertheless, this chalice has failed. It's empty. And much like she waits for menstruation each month, conveying her failure, she considers this metaphor, this horticultural semantic field of the tulip connecting to the womb, to have exploded, to have failed, to have thrown out its petals like shards. And so there's a violent semantic field here of anger and frustration. She would like to lash out, or figuratively plant a bomb. There's someone standing in the hall, near the door to the room where I stay. The hall is dusky. This is a man, his back to me. He's looking into the room, dark against its light. I can see now, it's the commander. He isn't supposed to be here. He hears me coming, turns, hesitates, walks forward, towards me. He is violating custom. What do I do now? I stop, he pauses, I can't see his face. He's looking at me. What does he want? But then he moves forward again, steps to the side to avoid touching me, inclines his head and is gone. Something has been shown to me, but what is it? Like the flag of an unknown country, seen for an instant above a curve of hill, it could mean attack. It could mean parley, surrendering. It could mean the edge of something, a territory. The signals animals give one another. lowered blue eyelids, ears laid back, raised hackles, a flash of bared teeth. What in hell does he think he's doing? Nobody else has seen him. I hope. Was he invading? Was he in my room? Oh, I called it mine. So she is concerned here about what this behaviour from the commander that is not in line with the prescriptive things he should be doing means. He is not following protocol. We realise that he is in his own way subversive later in the novel, but that subversion only really has a threat of consequence for Offred, and she chastises herself in feeling defensive about this metaphoric invasion, as she puts it, because she has been lulled into thinking about the room in the commander's household as her territory. She doesn't want to stake claim to it as mine, because that threatens a permanency that she would like to get out of, to escape and to get back to her old life, unrealistic as that may be. She hopes, but there may not be much meaning or realism to that hope. A quick summary of Chapter 9. Offred remembers looking through hotel rooms when she used to meet Luke when he was still married to his first wife. Their marriage has come out of adultery. That might be something that we morally judge. That might be something that we consider sinful. Certainly not a behaviour that would be permitted within Gilead's society. She reflects upon meeting him prior to their marriage. Infidelity is no longer a concept that she can afford. It's now a luxury for her. She can't think that she's unfaithful to Luke by trying to produce with the Handmaid. With the commander. And she feels guilt over her coming relationship with Nick. She discovers the quasi or pseudo tongue-in-cheek fake Latin message that has been etched from the prior Handmaid. This shows the wide-ranging theme in both novels of a desire for human communication. She later realises that the etching is disparaging. Nolite te bastardes carbandorum, or similar. I'm doing that from my head. I don't think I'm quite right there. It conveys the humanity of wanting to resist and translates as "don't let the bastards grind you down." When Offred asks the commander later, when they're having clandestine meetings for Scrabble, what that Latin means, she doesn't realise that it's not real Latin. It's one of the commander's schoolboy jokes. And by asking, she has very much betrayed that somehow the former handmaid, who clearly was having similar clandestine meetings, has betrayed him somehow to the next handmaid. This puts her very much at risk that if the former handmaid didn't commit suicide and was gotten rid of, perhaps it was as a result of Serena's doing. And therefore the transgressions, the lack of protocol of the commander, may be Offred's downfall, even though she has no control. In Chapter 11, Offred goes to the gynaecologist for her monthly checkup. A gynaecologist would not ordinarily see you on a monthly basis, but that is what happens in Gilead. and she remembers the appointment in present tense, perhaps to give it a kind of immediacy of threat. She lies on the table with a sheet blocking the doctor's view of her face. He calls her honey, which seems inappropriately familiar, and offers to help by impregnating her. He's said the forbidden word, sterile. There's no such thing as sterile anymore, not in a man, not officially. There are only women who are fruitful and women who are barren. That's the law in the patriarchy that is Gilead. The men cannot be to blame. It must be the women. The doctor says that he's helped many in this way. Is this rape? How does this sit in terms of our concept of consent? On one hand, this could save her life, but she is motivated to hesitate. In chapter 12, whilst bathing, Offred does not like to look at her body as it is. It determines her so completely. It's simply a vessel, and it's tattooed with the Eye of Gilead and an ID number. Again, we've mentioned that this is an allusion to the Holocaust, and a fairly stark one at that. She recalls an incident in which a desperate woman attempted to abduct her daughter from the supermarket in the time before. Women were becoming increasingly desperate to conceive. I thought it was an isolated incident at the time. She fades. She's gone now. I think of her as the ghost of a dead girl. Her daughter has been taken away by a higher status couple. A girl who does still exist, I hope, though not for me. Do I exist for her? Am I a picture somewhere in the back of her mind? She fears that a young girl's memory will fade faster than an adult's. 4 digits and an I, the ID number, keeps her within the borders of Gilead. It's a passport in reverse. There are 3 references to biblical passages in this chapter. And on the following slide, for our final point today, a shorter episode today, here is their significance to the narrative. St. Paul said it's either that or a close shave. Of course, this isn't quoting scripture. This is Offred's tongue-in-cheek allusion to the Bible, again showing her awareness, a dangerous awareness for Gilead's means. She won't simply be bought by the manipulation of scripture. This blunt, broad allusion is to Corinthians chapter 11, verse 5 to 6. Paul advised women to cover their hair when worshipping, since an uncovered head signified loose morals and promiscuity. Aunt Lydia here is implying that women who flaunt their hair might find themselves in compromising situations. To cultivate poverty of spirit comes from Jesus' Beatitudes and Matthew chapter 5 verse 3. Just as an aside, Beatitudes from the Bible, that spelling might look as though naturally in English it should be pronounced Beatitudes, but rest assured it is Beatitudes. Aunt Lydia equates loss of material things, the austerity that the handmaids have to live in, with an increase in spiritual awareness. Atwood makes us question Lydia's view, as Offred's lost mementos stand for a deep human attachment and affection. Blessed are the meek is also from Matthew, also chapter 5, this case verse 5. And Aunt Lydia manipulates biblical passages for her own purposes, here asserting that the handmaid should be submissive. Offred, as a knowledgeable, educated woman, however, who isn't forgetting her history, isn't allowing Lydia to render it a palimpsest for its purposes, knows that the passage goes on to say that the meek shall inherit the earth. That draws us to a conclusion for today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you ever so much. Please hit like if you are finding it helpful. Please subscribe if you're finding it helpful. Please hit the notification bell. It assists you. And if you've got any questions on applying these historical contexts or these intertextual links to the Bible in a close analytical way that marries up your argument, close analysis and context, by all means ask questions in the comments below, or any other more general comments, and I'll do my very best to get back to you in a timely way. See you next time.